This teenager showed no remorse after killing his mum over school results. Gregory Ramos was 15 years old living in Florida. His mum was Gail Clevenger, aged 46. On the 2nd of November 2018, the pair got into an argument over his school results. He later stated to detectives the following: "So I got home, I got into an argument with my mum. She slapped me across the face, she began to hit me, she started beating me, I didn't like that." He then calmly told officers that he had therefore strangled her to death. He described placing her body in a wheelbarrow and then into a car. He explained to officers that he'd had a mental breakdown and almost self-unalived 3 times. He called 2 of his friends following the murder to try and help him cover it up. He buried her body behind a church and then tried to stage a robbery. When he initially called police, he told them that he had returned home and the house had been burgled. However, his story would soon unfold and the police interviewed the friends and none of their stories matched up. Gregory eventually admitted to the true horrific events that had occurred. In December 2020, he pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, abuse of a body, and tampering with evidence. He was given 45 years in prison. He's apparently been very productive since being in custody and is working towards a high school diploma.
This ride malfunction might be a symptom of a much bigger problem. This video shows the moment where the Atmosphere ride at Oaks Amusement Park in Oregon malfunctioned, leaving 28 people hanging upside down for 30 minutes. Hazen Hathorn was one of the riders on the ride, and a fun fact is that he doesn't have freckles. Those are all broken blood vessels that occurred from hanging upside down for so long. We don't know exactly why the ride malfunctioned just yet, there's still an investigation ongoing, but this is maybe a symptom of a much bigger issue that's happening. And that's the fact that in America there's little to no regulations for theme park rides, meaning there's not really a standard for how often rides are maintained to be deemed safe. I literally just did a whole episode on this for the podcast where I talk about other theme park disasters that have happened throughout history. This picture is actually from a theme park ride test where the flume completely flew off of the ride, and that ride would go on to open and claim the life of a 10-year-old boy. And that's because the creator of the ride wasn't an engineer, he was just a hobbyist. But in America, if you can dream up a ride, you can make it. For instance, in Florida, parks with over 1,000 workers don't even have officials from the state inspect the rides for safety. Now, giving them the benefit of the doubt, no one died on this ride, and I'm sure it was made by engineers and not just some guy. If you want to hear about more theme park disasters that occurred throughout history because of our lack of safety regulations in America, you should check out episode 70 of the Heart Starts Pounding podcast.
These are things humans should never hear, part 1. What I'm about to show you is a simulation of what happened to Alaskan Flight 261, following a catastrophic loss of pitch control, killing all 88 people on board. This is real audio footage of the plane going down between the pilots and air traffic control. The plane went inverted, meaning it was flying upside down, and just listen to how calm the pilots are.
This is why people are afraid to send their kids to sleepovers. Imagine you're at a sleepover and at 11 p.m. your friend's dad comes downstairs with a smoothie that he's made. And it's kind of late, so you don't really want a smoothie, but he's like really insistent that you drink this smoothie. You kind of fake drink it so he'll leave you alone, but you watch as your 3 friends drink this smoothie and one of them drinks 2 servings of it. Then you all go back downstairs to hang out more, but your friends fall asleep like immediately. And just a little bit after that, you hear the basement door open. You freak out, so you pretend to be asleep, but you watch through your squinted eyes as your friend's dad comes down into the basement and one by one picks up your friend's limbs to make sure they're asleep. He even comes up to you and puts his finger under your nose to make sure that you're still breathing. And then he walks upstairs, but you don't know if he's gonna come back. So this actually did happen to a group of 12-year-old girls in Oregon, but luckily that 12-year-old girl that was pretending to be asleep got help for everyone. Also, I cover a lot of these kinds of stories, so if you have a dark curiosity, you should follow along. It turns out that the dad had put prescription strength anti-anxiety meds into the smoothies to make sure that all the girls were passed out. The girls girl just started calling and texting people until someone picked up. But look at this text she sent her parents. It said, "I might not respond, but please come get me," because she was so scared that she was also going to pass out from the drink. The dad was recently sentenced to 2 years in jail, but he said he did it because he wanted the girls to go to sleep so that he could go to sleep. But thank God that one girl was actually awake, because who knows what his real intentions were. The girls were hospitalized afterwards, but they were all okay. But the one that drank 2 servings of the smoothie did say that she blacked out the second she finished the second serving.
There's a shopkeeper. His name is, I'm probably gonna butcher it, but it's Serdar Benici. This happened in Adana, Turkey. He was closing up shop. He was putting in produce and items that he had on the sidewalk into the shop. And then on the CCTV footage pointing to the street and sidewalk, a man dressed in all black taps his shoulder. He looks back and he almost gets hit by a gate that was attached to a truck.
I think I know what you're talking about.
Also, he said after he looked,
Nobody
nobody
there.
was there.
I don't think that's fake, bro.
And-
Cause like, the fuck would he get out of faking that?
People pointed out that the guy's face is blurred compared to the actual shopkeeper.
Yo.
And that's the whole theory that people have come up with, that maybe it was his future self.
Trying to save him.
Or saved him. He saved him. If not, that would have like hit his head. I don't know if it would have killed him, but it would probably have like injured him really, really bad.
And also, how would he fake the timing, everything?
In the video, you don't even see him interact like with anybody. He just like looks around and he's confused.
Like, who the fuck tapped me?
And I did not find a single video saying it was fake or that the guy came out saying, yo, it was a hoax or whatever. The only thing I did find was...
These are deaths caught on audio, part 1. On January 26, 1967, 3 crew members were conducting a launch rehearsal at Cape Kennedy Air Force Station Launch Complex. The launch was scheduled the following month. The simulation was needed to determine whether or not the spacecraft would operate normally. And because the spacecraft wasn't loaded with fuel, it wasn't considered to be a dangerous exercise. At 1 p.m., the command pilot Gus Grissom, senior pilot Edward White II, and pilot Roger Chaffee entered the command module in their pressure suits. Immediately, Gus noticed a strange smell circulating throughout his suit, which he compared to sour buttermilk. The crew was going through their checklist when a violent fire broke out, and all 3 men's microphones caught it all. Just take a listen. It's also worth noting that there are aftermath photos of all 3 astronauts, and they are very bad. I really don't recommend looking them up.
In September of 2011, 2 young men broke into Craig Stockard's home in California. On that day, the robbers were looking for anything valuable in Kevin's house. This all took place in Delhi, California, a town pretty close to Sacramento. These young men searched all of Craig's property, and they eventually ended up in his barn, where they found a number of what they believed were blank CDs. After the 2 young robbers fled the home, Craig called the police himself and reported the robbery. But when the boys returned to their home and began looking at the CDs, they discovered something absolutely disturbing. On those CDs, they discovered CP or CSAM, aka lewd images of minors and, yes, children. Apparently, Craig had stockpiled hundreds of these videos and photos, and this led the robbers to rat on themselves and call the police. Eventually, Craig's home was raided, and yes, he was arrested and imprisoned for possession of CP or CSAM. According to authorities, he had been downloading these images and videos for over 7 years. And it turned out that over 30 of those 50 CDs that the boys stole from Craig's home contained CP or CSAM. And I can't find any clear resolution on this story, but according to what I'm reading online, the 2 burglars who reported Craig never were arrested themselves. So in committing a crime of their own, they busted someone for committing an even worse crime. Kind of strange how that worked out, isn't it?
This case will make you terrified to walk to your car alone. On November the 22nd, 2019, 19-year-old Ruth George was attending an event. Her family were then very concerned when she didn't return home the following day. Now, the event had been put on by a fraternity from the University of Illinois. Ruth had said bye to her friends at the end of this party, and they all went their separate ways. Ruth was then left alone to walk to her car. Ruth was last seen alive walking towards her vehicle. Her family reported her missing to police. Police tracked her phone to the same parking garage that she had been seen walking to her car in. Upon investigation, they discovered that her car was actually still parked there. When they took a closer look, they discovered something shocking. Ruth's body was in the backseat of the car, and there were clear signs of a struggle, and an SA had occurred. Her cause of death was determined to be strangulation. Investigators examined CCTV footage of the evening. They discovered that Ruth was not alone when walking to her car. A man was following closely behind Ruth. He entered the parking garage just seconds after Ruth, and he then, 35 minutes later, was captured on CCTV running away from the scene. The suspect was Donald Thurman, aged 26. He was arrested and charged with first-degree murder and aggravated SA. His defense was that he saw her, thought she was pretty, and when he tried to speak to her, she ignored him, and he was angry at being ignored. He has confessed to killing her, and as far as I can see online, he's being held without bail and he's waiting sentencing.
Welcome to Famous Autopsies Part 2. In this series, I'll be breaking down famous celebrity autopsy reports, so this is a massive trigger warning. Today we are going to be talking about Kurt Cobain, who was the lead singer of Nirvana. Kurt Cobain was outspoken about his struggles with mental health and addiction, often including it into his songs, but he also struggled with health issues. He was affected by chronic bronchitis and debilitating stomach pains. On March 31st, 1994, he fled from a rehab facility after just 3 days and took a cab to a gun shop in Seattle where, according to the receipt, he purchased shotgun shells, and on April 8th, an electrician who was meant to install security lighting found what he believed to be a sleeping Kurt Cobain in a studio attached to his house. But upon closer inspection, he saw blood coming from his ears. Sadly, Kurt Cobain was dead at just 27. His external exam revealed numerous needle puncture marks, with associating bruising and an entrance wound in the front roof of his mouth. It's accompanied by several lacerations, some with tissue hanging. The lacerations are likely a result of gases leaving the barrel with strong force. The internal exam revealed that the path of the bullet was upwards, front to back and slightly left to right. His skull sustained several fractures, meaning broken in multiple places in several regions. His brain was transected by the bullet, meaning severed. The lack of blood on scene is due to the fact that the entrance wound was inside of his mouth and the bullet settled in his head, meaning there was no exit wound. Rest in peace to Kurt Cobain, you will always be missed.
These are the harrowing Google searches that proved a police officer killed this 16-year-old girl. Susana Morales was a sweet 16-year-old girl who lived in Norcross in Georgia. She was last seen by friends and family on the evening of the 26th of July 2022. It was very out of character for her to just disappear. She was reported missing to police, and it seemed as though she'd just vanished into thin air. No one could work out what on earth had happened to her. The night she went missing, she did send a text message to her mum at around 9:40 p.m. telling her she was on her way home. Investigators were able to determine from an app on her phone that she walked along a road in the direction of her house between 10:07 p.m. and 10:21 p.m. They figured she may have got into a car at this point. Her phone last pinged near Oak Lock Trace. Disturbingly, the phone was then switched off. Now, initial searches proved fruitless and the trail seemed to go cold until 6 months later. Her naked remains were discovered dumped in the woods at around 6:30 p.m. on the 6th of February by a traumatized member of the public. They rang police and reported that there was what appeared to be a body near State Route 316. 22-year-old Miles Bryant, a police officer at the time, was arrested shortly after the discovery. His gun was reportedly found near the victim's remains. His internet searches included how long does it take a body to decompose and how are you ID'd by dental records. Miles was found guilty of malice murder, felony murder, kidnapping and false report of a crime. He has now been given life in prison.
This woman was recently found stabbed to death in the parking garage of a Boston airport, and now there's an international manhunt for the man responsible as he quickly boarded a flight to Kenya. This is Maggie Mbitu. She was a 31-year-old nurse who was last seen alive leaving her job at around 11 p.m. on October 30th of this year. She was finishing up her shift in Boston and then was planning to get ready for an upcoming girls' trip to Vegas. But when she didn't show up for work the next day, her employer immediately knew something was wrong. Her job as a nurse was extremely important to her, and she would never no-call, no-show. So Maggie's employer reached out to her family, who then contacted the police to officially report her missing. Somehow, information that police collected led them to Kevin Kangete, who knew Maggie. When authorities tracked Maggie's cell phone records, they found that her phone was in the same vicinity as Kevin's SUV, which was located via license plate recognition cameras. They then tracked his SUV to the Logan Airport parking garage, and this is when they discovered a gruesome scene. There in the front passenger seat of Kevin's car was Maggie's body. She had been slashed and stabbed to death with severe wounds on her neck and face. Authorities began looking for Kevin, and with security footage provided by the airport, he was spotted entering the airport terminal and boarding a flight. It was then discovered that Kevin had purchased a ticket to Kenya the morning before Maggie's body was found. As of right now, Kevin remains on the run and has fled the country, but police are working with authorities in Kenya to locate him. And it's reported that Kenya does have an extradition treaty with the US. Maggie was the youngest in a family of nurses, and she worked as a nurse for about 7 years. She was described as warm and caring, and she absolutely took pride in her job. She was a woman who loved to travel, and she was just looking forward to spending some time with her friends on a girls' trip. I've attached a GoFundMe in my bio for Maggie's family to help with expenses during this horrific time. Please consider donating or sharing, and please keep Maggie and her family in your thoughts. Justice for Maggie Mbitu.
This man sobbed on TV when he found his son's dead body. Now he's been charged with his murder. Justin Lee Turner was just the sweetest 5-year-old little boy from South Carolina. On the 3rd of March 1989, his dad Victor rang police. He told them that his son had got on the school bus that day and then never returned home. Justin's stepmom, Megan, said that she normally watches him get on the school bus, but on the morning in question, she was actually ill and was in the shower. She told police that she therefore didn't know for certain whether he'd got on the bus. Investigators started trying to put a timeline together. Witnesses actually reported that they'd never seen Justin get on the bus in the first place that morning. He hadn't actually attended Whitesville Elementary School at all that day. On the 5th of March, news crews were at the house capturing a search for the little boy. It was at this point that he was found dead. His body was found in a camper van by his dad, Victor. The child was said to have been strangled. His dad was filmed on TV as he wept with his head in his hands, but people could tell something wasn't quite right. Investigators felt that it was kind of obvious that he almost knew where to look for his son. He actually found him within seconds of going into the van. Police felt that he almost acted his way through the search. It then transpired that Victor had asked some really strange questions to police. He'd asked what would happen if a family member had done harm to the victim, such as killed him. However, frustratingly, there was very little evidence to go off. Police couldn't just convict him over a hunch. Now, stepmom Megan was initially actually charged in connection with Justin's death, but the case was dismissed. Tellingly, the couple moved away within weeks and Megan changed her name. Investigators reported that they never even received one single phone call from the pair about their son. They seemed to never want to get answers or justice. In 2021, the case was reviewed and old evidence was re-examined. Forensics looked into old physical evidence and new technology was able to reveal information. Fibers found in the family home matched the ones on the wounds on Justin's neck and on the clothes he was wearing. 34 years after Justin's death, his dad Victor is now charged with his murder.
This man accidentally recorded his own death, and whatever you do, don't look up the video. For some people, deep waters scare the living hell out of them. But for others, it's kind of a thrill. And this is the case for 22-year-old diver Yuri Lipsky. He was a qualified scuba diver and he loved a challenge. And the Blue Hole, which is in the Red Sea of Egypt, presented quite a challenge. The underwater life is vibrant and colorful. The corals below are something out of a fantasy movie. To many divers, this is the dive of a lifetime. About 184 feet below the ocean's surface is something called the Arch. And it's a horizontal tunnel that leads from the vertical shaft of the Blue Hole to the open sea. And then the very bottom of this is a little over 300 feet deep. On April 28, 2000, Yuri Lipsky would begin his dive into the Blue Hole, and he would not come back alive. As part of the gear he was using, he had a camera strapped to him to record the beautiful journey. He also only brought 1 tank of oxygen and he had weights strapped to his sides. But what he doesn't know is about 7 minutes from now, he would be dead. He made it to the arch and from there he continued to go down. You can view the video of this whole thing on YouTube, but it's very uncontrolled, it's shaky, and honestly frightening after you know what happens. He would then land with a thud at the bottom of the blue hole, and at this point they believe he was suffering from nitrogen narcosis, which happens when you're breathing air under extremely high atmospheric pressure. And it also affects your higher functions. You begin to have these feelings of euphoria that basically creates a delusion that you're completely okay. But you're really not at all, and it also screws with your concentration. You have no idea what's going on and you don't know where you are. And for some reason, Yori then removes his breathing apparatus. You hear Yori gasping for air and you can tell by the movements of the camera that he is thrashing back and forth for a breath. You can hear him literally struggling to breathe. And as you hear Yori struggling to breathe and shaking all around, the camera then goes still and this is the image where he died. This is just awful and I really don't recommend watching the video of it. Rest in peace to Yori Lipsky, and I really can't imagine going out like this.
On October 4th, 2009, 42-year-old Kimberly Cates was hanging out at home with her daughter Jamie. But by the end of the night, she would be dead. Early on the morning of October 4th, 4 young men approached Kimberly's home. They then shut off the power and entered the house. Upon entering the house, they searched the property for valuables before finding Kimberly in her bedroom with her 11-year-old daughter Jamie. When the 4 intruders entered Kimberly's room, she woke up, and that's when they attacked her. These 4 young men had traveled to the home with a machete, and Kimberly was hacked to death with 36 blows to her head and torso. Obviously, this was an extremely gruesome scene. But after killing Kimberly and waking up her 11-year-old daughter Jamie, the killers weren't done with their work yet. The killers then stabbed young 11-year-old Jamie in the face and in the chest. They were trying to stab her in the heart so she would die too. The killers then threw Jamie against a wall and exited the property after searching for valuables. At the end of the massacre, 42-year-old Kimberly Cates was dead, having been hacked to death with a machete in her own bed. Eventually, it was discovered that the 2 young men who planned out this massacre and recruited the other 2 boys for this violent spree were 17-year-old Steven Spader and 19-year-old Christopher Gribble. Steven Spader was a 17-year-old high school dropout who had formed a club centered around violence. This club was something that he called the Disciples of Destruction. Spader designed a logo for this club. He centered everything that it had to deal with around violence, and he began recruiting other members. That's when he found 19-year-old Christopher Gribble. Steven then told the 3 other young men that he had recruited into this disturbing club that the rite of initiation that they had to pass was a brutal home invasion. So on that evening, they set out into the world looking for a random house to enter, and that's when they discovered Kimberly Cates' house just somewhere along their route. Now, even though Kimberly died during the assault, her daughter Jamie survived miraculously. She ended up making a full recovery and is seemingly living a pretty normal life nowadays. Her father, Kimberly's husband, was traveling at the time of the attacks and he wasn't there on that fateful day. Obviously, these 2 got life in prison and their accomplices got a minimum of 30 years in prison. It's just disturbing to consider the fact that these guys set out that evening just looking for a random house to break into, searching for potential victims.
This is by far one of the worst cartel videos ever released, and this is a massive trigger warning. The brutal video that I'm about to explain takes place in an empty concrete room with no furniture. It looks like a scene straight from a Saw movie. As you play the video, you are immediately met with blood, and I don't say that lightly. There is literally blood everywhere. At first, when you see the victim, his torso looks like it's wrapped in saran wrap, but it's actually the shade of blood which reflects off the light. Upon playing the video, it's hard to tell if the victim is dead or alive, though his heart seems to be beating, as blood is leaking at an insane rate. The cartel member can be seen cutting the victim's throat with what appears to be a kitchen knife. After quickly slashing the victim's throat, the cartel member then takes the knife and cuts around the victim's face. From the top of his hairline down to his chin, it appears he's attempting to flay the victim's face. After cutting around the victim's face, there is so much blood that the cartel member loses his grip as he is holding the victim's head up. This then results in the victim's head falling back on the concrete ground, and as this happens, blood sprays out, leaving a streak of blood on the wall. At this point, you see the victim is somehow still alive. You see him move and attempt to breathe. The cartel member then tries to lift the victim by the head, but he can't get a grip due to the insane amount of blood. The clip then jump cuts and it shows the victim lying on his side, and the cartel member cuts his neck from behind, attempting to behead him. It jump cuts once again, showing that the victim has now been decapitated and someone seems to kick the severed head across the room. The skin is flopping down due to the attempted flaying, and again the video jump cuts. This time showing the cartel member cutting vertically down the victim's chest and stomach, completely opening him up. You see the victim's intestines and layers of fat. It's honestly a very, very disturbing sight. The cartel member then decides to switch things up and he begins hacking away at the corpse's knees. At this point, the corpse is completely drained of blood, and it's hard to explain, but in certain videos when this happens, the flesh looks completely different. I don't know, it's just hard to explain. The video then concludes with the victim hacked into pieces, disfigured, and completely disemboweled. All I can say is thankfully the video had no sound and was dubbed by music, because I could only imagine the sounds that this video produced. The victim was almost dead at the start of the video, so who knows what took place before the camera was turned on. This video is absolutely awful and extremely bloody. Whatever you do, stay curious and never go searching for it.
There's one haunted house that we need to have a discussion about, and it's the Haunted Hill House. This, in my opinion, could be the most haunted place in Texas and is one of the most haunted places in all of America. Now, this house is known to be a home to a demon named Toby, but we're going to talk about that later. First, let's talk about the history. The Hill House itself was supposedly a makeshift hospital in the 1900s, and a number of people died in there while being treated for various diseases. Inside of the home, there were also a couple of murders, including an infamous murder that occurred right here on these stairs. According to the owners, a man named Willie, who ran the brothel back in the day, had a son with one of the prostitutes named Elizabeth. Unfortunately, though, their son was born with Down syndrome, and Willie, eventually becoming frustrated with his son, beat him to death right in the upstairs. He also shot and killed the son's mother, Elizabeth, right here on the stairs. He shot her in the stomach, and her bloodstains are still visible on the stairs to this day. I mean, there's so much history we can cover in this TikTok, but they also have a room in the house where there are dolls hanging from nooses. I'm not kidding. Yeah, it's very, very creepy in there. Some of the past owners even practiced black magic in the house. There is a lot of history to unpack here. I also can't forget to mention that there was another murder in the home when a prostitute murdered her John and then killed herself in a bathtub. The upstairs of the house is home to a demon named Toby, and this picture claims to show him. And we talk about this in my YouTube video. I just spent the night there. It was one of the scariest nights of my life. That full video is available on YouTube now. But yeah, Toby the demon was supposedly conjured by some of the previous homeowners, and yeah, his presence is definitely felt in the upstairs. When we were up there, we were hearing literal growls echoing from the lower floor of the house. We caught all this on camera, and I cannot explain it. It was very, very spooky. The entire upstairs, the attic area where Toby is supposed to live, is just so unbelievably creepy, and it does have these phantom EMF signals that were setting off some of our devices. There's also video footage that's been captured in the Hill House that literally shows an investigator pictured right here being yanked out of the bed, and I'm talking like somebody grabs her ankles and pulls her at full force out of the bed. It's one of the craziest things I've ever seen. There are also tons of people who have been scratched in this house, scratched so deeply that they actually bled through their shirt. And yeah, this place is just evil. Straight up, it's just evil. If you want to see the full documentary that I made about this house, we spent the entire night there ghost hunting. We interviewed the historian there. He gave us an hour-long tour going through all of the history, covered tons of stuff that I couldn't cover on this TikTok, other deaths and strange things that happened there, including the story of a young boy who was found hanging from a tree outside in the back of the house. That video is on my YouTube channel now, The Paranormal Files. I will warn you, I have had people that watch some of my videos and claim that spirits and energy can travel through the screen. We actually had that happen with a video that we posted a few months ago. It was pretty crazy. Lots of people reported having stuff happen after watching it. So yeah, check it out. Be careful when you check it out. Protect yourself, just in case.
There's a really strange missing persons case happening right now that everybody should be talking about. This is Nancy Ng. She went missing during a yoga retreat to Guatemala last month. The details in this case are bizarre because it involves a whole group of people who basically witnessed Nancy go missing, yet most of them refused to talk to authorities. So on October 14th, Nancy left her home in Monterey Park, California to go on a week-long yoga retreat to Lake Atitlan. This would have been her second year in a row doing this, and it was just something that she was really excited about because she loved the area, and it was supposed to be just really relaxing. But just a few days into the trip, the organizer of the retreat called Nancy's family and told them that she disappeared. She was officially reported missing on October 20th, but the few details that we do have are really strange. Nancy was seen for the last time in this video, which was taken on October 19th. She was paddling on a kayak on Lake Atitlan and happily waving to someone off camera. She was with a group of 9 other tourists who traveled to Guatemala for the retreat as well. Nancy was last seen splitting up from the group with another woman to continue kayaking up the lake. According to that woman, the two paddled for roughly another mile before Nancy jumped into the lake and either drowned or disappeared. The woman said she then paddled back to the group, where they then all went back to the hotel where they were all staying and notified management. And when the hotel staff searched for Nancy and couldn't find her, that's when they called the police to report her missing. But this is when things start to get strange. According to the kayak company, who recently made a statement, all 9 of the other tourists in that retreat returned home the day Nancy disappeared. They all reportedly left the lake without saying a word, and they all checked out of the hotel within 12 hours and never paid for the excursion. On top of that, almost all of the witnesses in that retreat group have chosen not to come forward and talk with police. They never gave any witness statements, and they haven't been forthcoming with any information, which has severely hindered the investigation. Guatemalan officials searched the lake and Nancy's hotel room, but they suspended the search after just 3 days after finding no evidence. According to them, the weather made it difficult and affected the search. They believe Nancy drowned that day, and because there's no sense of any urgency to continue looking for her, this forced Nancy's family to hire an independent search and rescue team called Black Wolf Helicopters. They've been the only ones to extensively search the lake and surrounding areas for any clues as to what may have happened to Nancy. They've searched 95% of Lake Atitlan using helicopters, boat teams, and divers. But Nancy is still missing, and because not really anyone in the group is coming forward to talk with police, they stated that it should now be considered a criminal investigation. The woman's identity, who was last seen with Nancy, has not been released to the public that I can find, but according to Nancy's family, they know who she is, and they've even tried reaching out to her multiple times for some answers. Yet that woman has refused to speak with them. And what's also strange is that this woman reportedly told Guatemalan officials that Nancy drowned that day, but that witness statement is nowhere in the official police report. So at this point, with no one coming forward and suspicious witnesses with key information that's being withheld, nobody knows what to think. The FBI is now investigating Nancy's disappearance, and her family has since hired a lawyer in Guatemala to investigate whether or not she actually drowned. Unfortunately, Black Wolf Helicopters have since had to suspend their search, but they're demanding that someone in the group come forward to at least tell them where Nancy went into the lake, because it would be incredibly helpful to at least have a starting point. This situation is an absolute nightmare. I've attached a GoFundMe created for Nancy's family to help them continue funding the search, because as of right now, most of the search and rescue operations have been primarily funded by them, which is not fair at all. Any funds raised will go towards the search as well as travel expenses for the family, as they're wanting to be in Guatemala as much as possible. It's now been 3 weeks since Nancy went missing. It's time to find her.
However, coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
A 10-year-old boy was found dead in a bin at his mum's house. In Rock Island, Illinois, there has recently been a sickening discovery. A 10-year-old boy called Zion was found deceased in a bin in a garage. An autopsy has taken place and his death is being treated as suspicious. Shockingly, it's believed that he was deceased for around 7 months. A neighbour spoke to reporters and said that she was wondering why it took police so long to find the missing boy and how they found him in the bin. The child's mother, 37-year-old Sushi Staples, has been arrested. It's believed that an anonymous source contacted the police about weird things that Sushi was saying in relation to her son. On January the 3rd, Sushi allegedly said to her neighbour that Christmas would never be the same again. On July the 25th, the neighbour made another anonymous call, and police decided to do a welfare check. The investigation into Zion's death continues.
I killed my 3 children by strangling them, and my husband forgave me. My name is Lindsay Clancy, and on January 24th, 2023, I committed the unforgivable. My husband Patrick Clancy had gone out to get food when I became completely consumed with rage. I fell into a fit of dementia, and I had been diagnosed with postpartum depression in the preceding months and even had medication to take for anxiety. But that day, it seems it was not effective enough. I went to my 3 children, aged 8 months, 3 and 5 years, and strangled all 3 of them. Immediately after, I went up to the 2nd floor of my house and jumped out the window in an attempt to commit suicide. My husband arrived shortly after, discovering what I had done. I was transported to the hospital and will remain paralyzed for life. Despite what I did that day, my husband, Patrick Clancy, has agreed to forgive me, publicly explaining that he is still in love with me and has set up a fundraiser for our children, which has raised more than $1 million in total. Does my depression suffice for me to be forgiven?
This Bumble day ended with a man being killed. 17-year-old Emma Kuzak met 36-year-old Charlie on Bumble dating app. Charlie is believed to be from Glendale, California, but he was allegedly visiting Las Vegas on June the 28th. Contacting Emma via Bumble, he asked if she wanted to hang out that evening. The pair went to get alcohol and then they went back to Charlie's hotel room at the Luxor Hotel. It's believed that during the evening, Charlie showed Emma his handgun. Emma claimed that she grabbed it and shot it when Charlie was about to attack her. She said that they'd gotten into an argument. However, Emma did then change her story and said that she shot Charlie because he was kicking her out of his hotel room and she planned to rob him. Emma said that Charlie went to grab the weapon and so did she. Emma then rang police to report that she'd shot somebody in the hotel room. She states that she didn't intend to and she simply acted on impulse. She turned herself into police and she was booked at the Clark County Detention Center on her birthday when she turned 18. She's currently being held on a murder charge.
These are the weirdest facts you will ever hear, part 1. Abraham Lincoln once pardoned a man who was accused of trying to have sex with a horse. And the reason President Lincoln pardoned him was because the man was drunk. Next up, ancient pharaohs used to masturbate and ejaculate into the Nile River to make sure the river will continue flowing. This is absolutely crazy, and just imagine being a bystander watching this. Lyndon B. Johnson, who was the 36th President of the United States, often whipped out his penis, which he nicknamed Jumbo. And he also peed himself a lot and in public. Next, until the late 1800s, some male singers would be castrated to preserve their high-pitched voice, which is just insane. Adolf Hitler had a micro you-know-what. And not only that, he did not pee out of the tip. He had a condition where he peed from the underside of his you-know-what. This definitely made him a super insecure man. Finally, noble women in ancient Rome would often pay to sleep with gladiators. And some gladiators were so popular that they were able to buy their freedom with the money they made from doing it.
Poisoned my 2 children with cyanide-laced candy to cash in on their life insurance. My name is Ronald O'Brien, a 30-year-old American man, married and father of 2. I was in debt over $100,000 and felt desperate. To salvage my financial situation, I decided to do something terrible. In the weeks leading up to Halloween, I took out a high-value life insurance policy for my 2 children, Timothy and Elizabeth, so that if they were to die suddenly, I would receive a large sum of money from the insurance. On Halloween night in 1974, I poisoned my own children with cyanide-laced candy, a highly potent poison. I even poisoned other children in the neighborhood to try to conceal my act. Timothy took one of the candies and quickly fell seriously ill. He had to be rushed to the hospital where he tragically passed away. Fortunately, Elizabeth and the other children heard about the incident and did not consume the tainted candy. I was quickly identified as a suspect by the police and eventually sentenced to death.
This beauty queen is accused of killing her husband over an apparent affair. In 2020, Lindsay Shiver posted one of her wedding photos online. She had married football player Robert Shiver and called theirs a perfect marriage. However, it transpires that this couldn't be further from the truth. Lindsay is a 36-year-old former Miss Houston County, and Robert once signed for the NFL's Atlanta Falcons. The pair have 3 children together and a stunning Bahamas home, as well as a house in Thomasville, Georgia. Now, according to court documents, Robert filed for divorce on the 5th of April after stating that Lindsay was having an affair. On the 28th of July, Lindsay was accused of planning to have her ex killed. According to news outlets, police were actually looking for a suspect for an unrelated break-in at Grabber's Bed Bar and Grill. Police came across WhatsApp messages on Lindsay's phone relating to the alleged murder plot. Lindsay has been arrested along with a 28-year-old male who is believed to be her boyfriend. A man called Farron Newbold was also arrested as the apparent hitman.
These are the weirdest things kids ever brought to school, part 1. Up first, during World War II, schools would have kids bring in all kind of trash like scrap metal, rubber, paper, and virtually anything they could get their hands on. They did this so these materials can be recycled into weapons and machinery. So these young children would literally bring in metal to help win World War II for America. Next up, elementary school students were at recess one day when one of the kids decided to take a hornet's nest into the school. This resulted in teachers and students getting stung and just sending the whole entire school into a panic. But the real question is, why in the world would this young kid bring a whole hornet's nest into the school? Up first, this teacher told her class to bring the oldest thing they could find in the school the next day. And you won't believe what this one kid brought. Believe it or not, this boy brought his old neighbor to school that day because it was the oldest thing that he could find. Next up, this middle schooler brought a voodoo doll to school one day, and he then said he's going to use it against the principal. The principal then found out about this and the young boy was expelled from school, which makes sense if you bring a voodoo doll to school and say you're gonna use it on the principal. Finally, this middle school girl had a 2-month-old sister, and everybody in her class wanted to see it. So one day before school, she put it in her backpack and brought it to school to show everybody. Long story short, her mom was not happy about this, nor the school, and she was then suspended for 5 days. This is real footage of Robert Oppenheimer testing the first ever atomic bomb.
They had to commit themselves and their experiments to the test. July 13th, they began the final assembly. The bomb was hooked up to a crane which would lift it to the tower. July 14th, finally the ride to the top. Cables, detonators, informer, initiator hookup. July 15th, final dry runs. Tension. Everything ready. July 16th, a rainstorm with spectacular lightning delayed the test from 2 a.m. to 5:29 a.m., just before dawn. Dignitaries from the scientific world watched from the hills. Participants and watchers were instructed to lie on the ground, facing away from the tower. Only after the initial flash could they look at the developing fireball through welder's goggles. A flare in the sky signaled the final countdown. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, now. The flash was later calculated to be brighter than 1,000 suns. Miles away, a young girl, blind from birth, saw the flash. Men at the site felt the heat of a desert sun. Then came the shockwave. 2 GIs at the command.
31 decomposing bodies were found inside of this funeral home in Indiana. So welcome to the Langford Funeral Home and Family Center. This funeral home was located in Jeffersonville, Indiana, and for years people trusted them with the funeral process, the burial of their loved ones and pets. But in 2022, local authorities received a tip about the building. Neighbors were reporting a very foul smell emanating from the funeral home. And disturbingly, when officers entered the building, they discovered 31 bodies in varying states of decay strewn throughout the building. Obviously, a lot of these bodies were not being refrigerated. They were just being left out to rot. And in addition, they found the cremated remains of 16 people. That brings the total up to 47 individuals' remains found out in the open inside of this building. It was also reported that some of those bodies had been sitting in the building since March, and it was only investigated in July, which means I can't imagine what they looked like, what they smelled like. I mean, this is just so shocking. Eventually, Randy Langford, the mortician owner of the business, pled guilty to theft. These theft charges stemmed from his failure to actually finish out the funeral process and provide his clients with the services that they had paid for, like burial and cremation. But this story only gets more disturbing. So when authorities actually went through the building and checked on everything, they found that 3 of the building's 4 air conditioning units did not work. Which means that this guy, Randy, the one who ran the place, was sitting there with the smell of all of those bodies almost constantly while he was working. Another family actually filed a civil complaint against Randy too and said that he had sent them a box reportedly containing their daughter's remains. But when authorities searched through the complex, they actually found their daughter's rotting corpse amongst all of the bodies. I mean, I feel like this guy should definitely have gone to prison for a much longer time for what he did, but I guess that's the US justice system for you.
This school shooter flipped off the parents of the kids he killed in court. On the morning of February 27, 2012, Thomas M. Lane, a 17-year-old juvenile and former student of Chardon, he then shot 6 students at Chardon High School in Ohio, resulting in the deaths of 3 of them. And the video I'm about to show you shows Thomas Lane in court, wearing a shirt that says killer, and then he flips off the victim's parents, and then goes on to say extremely disturbing things to them. Here's the video, and it's absolutely sickening.
To my left is Nicholas Burling, Judge and County Assistant Prosecutor, Mark Bartolotta, Judge and County Assistant Prosecutor, and from the Lake County Prosecutor's Office, Karen Colwell.
Thank you, Lynn. You can make it from where you sit. What? You can make it seated where you are, if you would. Take your time.
Saying pull the trigger to kill your son, you know, masturbates to memory of you.
All right. That's all your client has to say, Mr. Friedman?
Yes, Your Honor.
Nick is a very kind and loving. Why would you want to hurt him? You don't know kind. You're evil. I will have to eventually forgive you. Otherwise, you will haunt me. You will never, ever be in my thoughts after this. Never. My family will move on, not you.
Have you ever thought about maybe becoming a star? Have you ever thought about that? I mean, what if you and I decided to make, if ever you and I got married and we decided to make our own videos, and we added them to different sites.
So this is Corbin Pinnell, aka Jupiter. So when I first saw videos about this guy, I thought the whole thing was a big meme. But then allegations of grooming, of CP possession, and all of that started to surface, and the story took a dark turn. So Corbin, or Jupiter as he likes to be called, is a guy who just makes videos on TikTok and YouTube. But he has been caught many, many times talking to minors on video calls, asking them for explicit content. I mean, there have also been screenshots leaked of him asking for these images, him being a total creep, admitting to wanting to be with a minor. This guy has been caught trying to do something sketchy with an underage person so many times that I couldn't even show you all the examples if I had a full 10-minute long video. But he's not just allegedly a pedophile. I mean, check this video out. So yeah, it's kind of hard to find the truth in this situation, but a search warrant was allegedly executed on his house dealing with child internet-esque crimes, if you know what I'm talking about. That was a few months ago. I don't know if anything ever came from that, but I mean, there are just so many videos that you can find of this guy where he's literally admitting to sending explicit photographs to, in one of the videos I saw, a child who was 13 years old. He admits to it. He just says it's a transgression of his. I would definitely go check out the creator Linda Binda here on the app. They've done a very good job of covering this whole story, interviewing him multiple times. But yeah, I mean, this is a predator lurking in literal plain sight, admitting to what they've done in the past. So I hope something is done about this situation soon, because it is disturbing.
What? Look in there, mate. Look in there. What? Look in there.
This is Brianna Jai. She was found in a park with multiple stab wounds on Saturday.
So that was back in February, and I just wanted to do a quick update as this case has now gone to trial.
Some of the details coming out of court are absolutely shocking. Just a quick recap, this was 16-year-old Brianna Ghey. She was found stabbed to death back in February in broad daylight on a Saturday afternoon. She was found laying on the path in a park in Warrington by 2 dog walkers, and she'd been stabbed a total of 28 times. 2 teenagers were arrested on suspicion of murder, and it's now come to light that they actually planned Brianna's murder weeks, possibly even months in advance. These 2 15-year-olds had a hit list of 5 people that they wanted to murder, one being Brianna. They'd exchanged messages talking about killing her, and one of them had said, "I want to find out if it screams like a girl or a man." Now, Brianna was a transgender teenager, and due to the evidence, it's now thought that this was a targeted attack because of this, which just goes to show how sick these 2 people actually are. They'd discussed killing 4 other people and also their desire to watch torture videos on the dark web. A note was shown in court that was written by one of the suspects, and it read, "Saturday, 11th of February 2023. Victim Brianna Ghey. Plan. Meet Y at Wooden Posts 1 p.m. Walk down to Library bus stop. Wait until Brianna gets off the bus. The 3 of us walk to Linear Park. Go to the Piper Tunnel area. I say code word to Y. He stabs her in the back as I stab her in the stomach. Y drags the body into the area. We cover up the area with logs." Both suspects are apparently trying to blame each other, and neither have taken any responsibility for Brianna's death. Their identities are being kept private due to their age, but there have been plenty of other cases similar to this one where the reporting ban has been lifted after the trial has finished and they've been convicted. I'll keep an eye on the trial, and I'll do a follow-up video once they've been sentenced.
The death of Kate Spade is an incredibly sad story. And at the end of this TikTok, you'll understand why people were enraged when Ulta sent them this email after her death. Catherine Noelle Valentine Brosnahan Spade, aka Kate Spade, was born in 1962 in Missouri. Originally, she graduated from college with a journalism degree, and she expected to go into TV broadcast journalism. But eventually, Kate entered the fashion industry, and from that point on, she knew what her life's calling was. In her time spent as a fashion editor, Kate noticed that there was a lack of affordable and stylish handbags for sale. So, in January of 1993, she and her spouse, Andy, founded Kate Spade New York. Quickly, Kate Spade's handbag designs took the world by storm, and before long, Kate Spade was one of the most recognizable brands on the planet. And Kate went from being a broke college kid to one of the richest women on earth. But even though Kate Spade was a fashion designer known worldwide for her fashion sense, and people thought she was a well-put-together woman, she was suffering deep inside. After her death, it was revealed that Kate had been struggling with depression and anxiety for many years, stemming from the fact that she got rich and famous at a very young age. And this depression and anxiety led to Kate Spade's death on June 5th, 2018. On that day, a housekeeper entered Kate Spade's apartment in Manhattan, and she found that she had hanged herself with a red scarf. Kate's death and the way that she took her own life was completely unexpected and was a shock to the world and even her own family members. They knew that she had been battling demons forever, but they had no idea that she had a plan to take her own life. And sadly, it was reported that Kate left a note before she took her own life, which was addressed to her daughter. Now, obviously, this was shocking worldwide news, but after Kate's death, what did Ulta decide to do? Well, in spring of 2022, millions of people who subscribed to get updates from Ulta received this email, which read, "Come hang with Kate Spade." And when they opened up the email, Ulta doubled down on this wording and once again wrote, "Come hang with Kate Spade, the New York City It Girl is back." Obviously, this choice of wording was extremely poor considering the manner in which Kate took her own life. And people across the world were absolutely shocked and disgusted that Ulta didn't think this through before sending this email out. Now, Ulta did eventually apologize for this and cited it as some sort of a human error. But yeah, it's just another tragic footnote in the tragic story of how Kate Spade died.
Groomed by a man more than 3 times her age, Kellyanne Bates was only 14 when she met the man that would end her life in what still remains one of the most horrific murders in the UK. Quick trigger warning, some of the details in the video are quite graphic and hard to listen to. James Patterson Smith was an extremely violent man. On the outside, he looked perfectly normal and was actually described by friends as well-groomed and house-proud. He'd been in a few relationships before meeting Kelly, but they'd all ended due to his violent temper. He'd even tried to drown 2 of his previous girlfriends. and at the age of 46, he met 14-year-old Kelly while she was babysitting for some of his friends. Their relationship was kept a secret by Kelly and James for 2 years, but at the age of 16, when she left school, she moved in with him. When Kelly's parents finally met James, they were shocked by his age, and Kelly's mum did everything she could to try and persuade Kelly to leave the relationship. As the months went on, Kelly became more and more withdrawn, and eventually all contact between her and her family stopped. On April 16, 1996, the police received a call from James saying that he'd accidentally drowned his girlfriend in the bath. When they arrived at the house, they found blood throughout the rooms, and Kelly's naked body was in the bedroom. It became quite clear that this was not an accidental death. Kelly had drowned in the bath, but only after enduring up to a month of torture at the hands of James. Kelly had over 150 injuries in total. She'd been tied up with a ligature around her neck, she had burns to her legs, a fractured arm, multiple stab wounds from knives, scissors and forks. Her hands were crushed, she had stab wounds inside her mouth, she'd been partially scalped, and she had 2 empty eye sockets. Kelly had endured all of these injuries in the weeks leading up to her death, before finally being dragged to the bathroom and drowned. James was quickly arrested but denied murder, saying that Kelly had inflicted all these injuries on herself to make him look bad. He then changed his story and said that it was him, but that Kelly had taunted him and dared him to do it. It only took the jury 1 hour to find him guilty, and he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 20 years. In January 2023, he actually became eligible for parole, but it was denied and he remains behind bars.
When this teenager vanished, her aunt was horrified to find the word help written in the woods. Danielle Locklear was just 15 years old. She was an intelligent girl who lived in North Carolina with her grandparents. She'd been living there since June 2013, and during that time she got a boyfriend. The boy in question was 17-year-old Jamichael Malloy. Danielle seemed to be initially really happy with him, and the pair had met through the local church. Jamichael seemed like a really nice guy and her family approved. Things seemed really perfect for a while until the relationship became rocky. They started breaking up and getting back together quite frequently. It was in March 2014 when things would turn really dark. Danielle seemed more down than usual, and it was a far cry from how happy she'd been the previous summer. Her family were very worried when she left home on the evening of March the 11th and failed to come back. She had told her step-granddad that she needed to drop something off at her friend's house. This wasn't too far away, she had told them which friend it was, and they knew it was just round the corner, so they didn't expect her to be out long. When she was still not home the next morning, they called police. Initially, investigators started wondering whether she had left of her own accord or maybe had been taken. They discovered that Danielle had been to a local hangout area the day she went missing, and this was a creek in Hope Mills. Now, Danielle's aunt heard rumours about the creek while Danielle was missing and went to investigate. Chillingly, she saw the word help written into the dirt on the trail. Danielle's aunt didn't know whether this was serious and had been left as some sort of clue, or whether it was just kids playing around. Then there was another disturbing find. It was one of Danielle's socks. The sock looked like it had kind of been rolled off of a foot. However, what we do know is that Danielle did make it home that day after hanging out at the creek. Her family had seen her that evening, and it wasn't until 9:45 p.m. when she said she was going for that quick trip to her friend's house. Police did confirm with the friend, though, that she never made it there. So this is obviously really confusing at this point, but stay with it because it will make sense in the end. Police decided to question the boyfriend, who claimed that he'd not seen Danielle for a few days, but he said that they'd broken up and she was struggling mentally. He said she was refusing to accept the fact that he had broken up with her, so he'd blocked her. Jamichael even had an alibi for that night. He said he was with his friend Dominic, and Dominic backed up the story. When police searched his phone, though, they found something shocking. Texts between him and Danielle were talking about Danielle being pregnant. Jamichael's phone also had text messages back and forth with other girls the night that Danielle went missing. Police figured he couldn't be involved. He had an alibi that night with Dominic, and he was also just texting other girls randomly that night. It was an agonising few weeks until April the 2nd when there was finally some news, but unfortunately it wasn't good. An off-duty police officer spotted something off a bridge near the South River. Tragically, it was Danielle's body. Shockingly, she had large blocks tied around her waist and a sock in her mouth. This was clearly a homicide. The autopsy confirmed that Danielle was not pregnant at the time and had died from asphyxiation. Danielle had interestingly been found less than a mile from Jermichael's home, so he was made prime suspect. In his house, they also found blocks and rope that matched the ones that were found on Danielle's body. They also found Danielle's phone nearby, which contained a terrifying voicemail from Jermichael. He stated, "If you come around me, I will kill you." On April the 9th, he confessed. It transpired that on the evening that Danielle had vanished, Jermichael and Dominic drove with Danielle to that creek. So we now know that she'd been there twice. Once the day that she'd gone missing, and then in the evening she had also gone with Jermichael and Dominic. The couple had got into an argument about the apparent pregnancy and it had turned physical. Jermichael strangled her and Dominic helped him drag her dead body to the car. They tied blocks to her and dumped her in the river. Both males were arrested and charged, Jermichael with second-degree murder and Dominic with accessory after the fact. Dominic got 6 to 8 years in prison and Jermichael got 25 to 31 years. This woman screamed, "I don't want to die," as she was dragged to her death in a horrifying theme park incident. Kelty Byrne was a Canadian student animal trainer and competitive swimmer. She was working at Sealand of the Pacific to earn extra money, and this involved being trained to work with orcas, otherwise known as killer whales. In controversial theme parks such as Sealand of the Pacific and SeaWorld, huge animals are either bred in captivity or traumatically captured and ripped apart from their families and natural habitats for humans' entertainment. On February the 20th, 1991, Kelty was working a shift and 3 whales were in one of the pools, including the infamous Tilikum. In a horrific turn of events, Kelty accidentally slipped and fell into the whale pool and attempted to grab onto the edge and save herself. However, before she could do so, she was grabbed by one of the whales that dragged her into the pool. The 3 whales then began throwing Kelty around, with many speculating that they may have simply thought this was a game. Others theorised that the whales were so traumatised and angered by their lives in tiny little pools that they took it out on Kelty. She was dragged under the water and then back up, screaming, "I don't want to die." After this horrific ordeal, she eventually drowned. It's reported that she was absolutely covered in bruises, was completely battered, and also covered in teeth marks. If I didn't know this was a true crime case, I would think it was a disturbing horror film. On the morning of the 7th of October 2022, a barefoot woman was running around Excelsior Springs, Missouri, bashing on people's doors. Witnesses describe her looking like she came straight from a horror film and she was calling for help. She'd been beaten, held captive, and SA'd for weeks. The woman was a shocking sight. She was covered in injuries and was wearing a bin bag. Disturbingly, she was gasping for breath as she had a very tight metal collar locked round her neck. It was a nurse who opened the door to her and let her come in. The nurse started to call police, and at this point the woman panicked. She warned her that the captor would kill her and claimed that he had killed her 2 friends. When police got there, the woman explained that a man called Timothy had captured her the month prior. He'd been holding her hostage this whole time. She said he'd been keeping her locked in the basement and had been SAing her. Disturbingly, she told police that he actually had a young son who lived at the house with him. When Timothy had taken his young son to school the one day, she used it as her opportunity to escape. Police made their way to the home of 39-year-old Timothy Haslett Jr. and found the property did in fact have a basement like the woman described. Timothy was arrested and is facing 9 charges, including first-degree kidnapping. He's being held on a $3 million bond and faces 5 life sentences. Before his arrest, police were actually called to his address 3 times. Twice they were asked to do welfare checks, and this was from an employer and also family members. Police have searched his home with cadaver dogs and they haven't yet released what they know.